Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Caroline, and this month I read 12 books, and that's what we're here to talk about today. There are timestamps in the description of this video, so if you want to go ahead and look through that, find a book that you're interested in hearing my thoughts on, or if you just want to sit back and watch all my reviews, good luck to you because I'm going to try to keep it short. I just don't know how this is going to go. This month, in April, I read 12 books. Let's get started. So the first book that I read in April was All the Missing Girls by Megan Miranda. I did listen to this audiobook, I checked it out from my library, and I gave it 3 stars. This book had so many things that I thought I was going to be such a fan of. First of all, we have the coming home trope. So a young woman who moved away from her small hometown because of a secret in her past. Maybe not a secret, but just a dark part of her past. And now she's had to come home and revisit her hometown as an adult. I love that trope. I don't know if it's just because it's so universally relatable or what, but that trope always draws me in. So once our main character returns home, readers find out that someone from her past had gone missing. Like in the past, not in the current day, but in the current day someone new has gone missing in a very similar fashion. But that is not even the most interesting part of this book, in my opinion. Readers get to see the last day of her being home, and so the whole mystery is what happened right when she got home. So we go backwards in the timeline, and I just thought that was so cool. I thought it was really original, and it was executed pretty well. For me, for a book to get at least 4 stars, I just need the characters to be a little more memorable, and I didn't feel like these characters lived up to the standards that I would hold like 4-star characters to be. But if you're just looking for something that's a solid mystery, this is somewhere between a 3 and a 3.5 stars in my book. The next book that I read was I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid, and I also read this via audiobook. I was just off to kind of a lazy listening start to the month. I gave this book 4 stars, and I thought it was so weird and creepy. It got under my skin. And I think that listening to the audiobook got to me more than if I had just actually been reading a physical copy of this book, because the narrator went hard and it just totally paid off. I think that this book is very easy to spoil, so I don't want to give that much away, but it did remind me a little bit of The Bell Jar, just in some of its themes and the first person narration. I think that this was just right in that specific weird niche quirky genre that I love so much. So if you're interested in checking it out, if you have a Scribd account, I listened to this on Scribd. It was short, I listened to it in one day, and I've just been thinking about it all month. It really freaked me out. If you're a fan of that genre and that kind of thing, I think you should check it out. Next, I read a book that I wasn't planning on reading. It was just something that had been on my TBR shelf for so long that I wanted to kind of revisit this author. It was Confessions of a Murder Suspect by James Patterson. James Patterson was one of my favorite authors when I was in middle school and high school. I read a mix of like YA series from him and then adult books that maybe I shouldn't have been reading in middle school, but it's okay. It's fine. Okay, I'll go ahead and say I gave this 1 star, but I rated this book like that, not realizing that it was YA. This is about a family with very high achieving children, and the parents are found dead on the very first page of this book. It is then thought that one of the children is responsible for the parents' death, so a police investigation ensues, and then also the siblings, they try to launch this investigation of their own, figuring out if it was in fact one of them, which I think could have been such an interesting story. The dialogue and the writing just felt so immature, but if I had known it was written for a younger audience, I probably would have cut it more slack, but I'm sticking with the 1-star rating for now. It was tough to get through. The only reason I did finish it just was because the chapters, like if you've read James Patterson before, you know the chapters are so short that it was just hard to stop turning the page, even though I didn't really care. I just wanted to know what happened to these parents, so that combined with the short chapters let me finish it. I don't know. Next, I read Wolfhunter River by Rachel Caine. This is the 3rd book in the Stillhouse Lake series, which I gush about in what feels like every single one of my videos. I gave this book 4 stars, and just as a quick recap, I gave Stillhouse Lake 4 stars, and then the second book in that series, Kilman Creek, 3 stars. So just to say, I did think that this 3rd installment in the series was better than the 2nd book. This series follows Gwen Proctor, who in the 1st book, right at the very beginning of the book, this is completely spoiler free, but in the 1st book finds out that she has been married to a serial killer. So then her husband is imprisoned. She is acquitted of being an accomplice, and she has to take her 2 children, go off the grid, and basically live in hiding and live in fear of these internet trolls who are convinced that she helped her husband with his killings. Obviously, new characters are introduced in each book, and she goes on these new, I guess you could call them adventures throughout the series, but I just feel like Rachel Kane does a wonderful job with not making this plot feel old. I really love this world, I really love this family, and I love going on this journey with them. The next book I read was Sunset Park by Paul Auster, and this was another audiobook that I checked out from my library. It played exactly into this specific little quirky genre that I love, like that bleak, slice of life, Dickensian, no hope for anybody kind of book. Which, maybe that's a little unfair. I'm not saying there's no hope in this book, but it was bleak, y'all. The main character, Miles, is something of a, I don't want to say a savant, but definitely a very brilliant young man who just isn't living up to his full potential. He comes from a tragic past, which is revealed throughout the book, and he's just so morally gray. I went back and forth so much in this book of whether or not I thought he was relatable or if I thought I hated him. He makes mistakes, but he has a conscience, and I love characters like that. I will not be forgetting this book. I did give it 4 stars. I was leaning toward 5 stars, but towards the end, some secondary characters had plot lines that I just thought started to spin out of control, and I was very interested in these characters, but I was just more interested in Miles's story. And since this isn't a series, it's just a standalone, I kind of wish that Auster had taken more time to develop Miles to let him have a full character arc. But at the same time, I do admire how he kind of leaves Miles's character. That's all I'm gonna say. Next, I read Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. I gave into the hype on this one. So going back to that theme of not living up to your full potential, I feel like Bernadette, who is the mother in this story, has a past that she feels like is a little unfulfilled. So we see her in her everyday life as a mother, as a wife, as a neighbor, and then one day she kind of snaps out of it all. What is so interesting about this book to me is that the first theme that comes to mind is motherhood. But then as I think more and more about it, it's almost more about daughterhood, which, is that a word? We get to go on this journey with Bernadette's daughter, and I feel like that's something that isn't explored, at least in the things that I've been reading recently. This is told kind of through a series of letters and emails and documents and just hearsay, and it was so creative. I thought it was so fun, and it made me laugh. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read Big Little Lies and I gave it 5 stars, and I am mad at myself that I've put it off for this long. I do have a physical copy of this book. I just don't have it here with me at the moment. But my new favorite plot device that I've just realized was used in this book. And it is where a mystery is set up at the very beginning of the book. And then we have to go back in time, follow the characters throughout the story to meet back up to the point where the mystery is solved. Are you with me? So this one really is about motherhood. Motherhood is a huge theme in this book. It's just such a domestic thriller about being a mom, being a wife, being a woman in your community. This book starts off with a death. It is presumed that it's a murder, and we know that the person who has died is in the community as well as the killer. So then it is so much fun as all these characters are introduced to try to figure out what happened. Now, I just described this book as being very fun, very readable, but it does have really, really, really heavy topics all throughout the book. So if you are interested in reading this book and you have certain trigger or content warnings that you're concerned about, definitely look into this one. I don't want to spoil anything here, but just wanted to give you a heads up on those. Oh, I am so excited about this next book. I read Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I was really nervous about this book because just from reading the premise, it sounded so good to me, and it sounded like maybe it'd be literary fiction. And then when I read the tags on Goodreads and realized that this was science fiction, I got a little bit worried. Side note, if you have any science fiction or fantasy recommendations for a beginner, please leave them in my comments, because I really want to start doing better with those two genres. But I digress. This book, I gave it 4 stars. It was so good. I'm going to tiptoe around whatever I say here about this book, because if you don't know anything about it, that's how you need to keep it going into reading it. It's about 3 friends as they grow up through school and into their early adulthood, and I don't want to spoil it. They're trying to make sense of a world that they weren't prepared for. I think I'm good with that description. These characters were so memorable. And what I really liked is that the biggest twist of this book comes on pretty early. You know how you're reading a book sometimes and maybe you're just reading it for the twist. I definitely do that with tons of books. And I kind of can feel like, all right, it's coming up, it's coming up. But with this book, it just hit me out of nowhere. So I thought that was really, really fun and a creative way to let that storyline unfold for the readers. The next book I read was Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating by Christina Lauren. I loved this book, and I am not ashamed to say that I gave it 5 full stars, because for what it was, like this cute contemporary or new adult romance, I loved it. This is about the 2 main characters, Josh and Hazel, and just their evolving friendship. And it's kind of a will they, won't they, friends to lovers storyline. I thought the dialogue was always realistic. It didn't really make me cringe. There might have been some cringy moments, but I think that's gonna happen with just about anything in this genre, at least from my experience. What I mostly appreciated was just that we really didn't see any scenes where Josh and Hazel weren't together. It would be like, Josh and Hazel are together, and then there wasn't like this long scene where Josh would be off with his family or where Hazel had to go to work. Like, we would have short little bits where they were on their own and then somehow they would reconvene, and I thought that just made the plot move so fast. It was so page turning, and the only other book in this genre that I have enjoyed this much has been The Hating Game by Sally Thorne. So I just hope that I can stay on this roll of finding books in this genre that I really enjoy. The next book I read was another complete wild card that I had never heard of. It was The Possible World by Lise O'Halloran Schwartz, and I found this again on my library's audiobook app, and I gave it 4 stars. This book rides a very fine line between being literary fiction and historical fiction, and it uses a plot device that I'm usually not super into, which is like multiple perspective, but just very different perspectives. Like, these people really are not in each other's lives until a certain event brings them all together. So sometimes I think that that can make a story hard to follow, and sometimes you're trying to put the pieces together when you should just be enjoying the story. But I thought that this was done really seamlessly. This book has such an intense start. A young boy survives a mass killing. He is one perspective. I think he's 7 years old. The second perspective comes from a young doctor at a hospital. And then the third perspective is from one of the oldest women in New England, and she reflects on her past but from her present state of mind. So all of these characters end up being tied together in some way, and I thought that this was really a lot different than what I've been reading recently, and I've never heard anyone else talk about this book, and that's just my own fault. Obviously, I wasn't looking up anything about this book before I read it, but I am interested and excited to read more reviews now that I have. Y'all are about to judge me hard. The second to last book that I read this month that I did listen to on audiobook was The Chocolate Chip Cookie Murder by Joanne Fluke. I feel like people love to hate on these books, and let me tell you, I gave it 3 stars, but for what it was good. It was cozy, it was fun. I really wanted to give it 4 stars, but it was just too long for my taste. It's about a young woman who runs this cookie shop, and she has a brother-in-law who is on the police force in her small town. There's a murder in the town, and then because of these really strange and kind of unrealistic circumstances, she has to help her brother-in-law solve this crime. Thought it was cute, thought it was quirky. It's kind of on brand with the other things that I read. It's something I've kind of laughed at in passing, but I've always been curious as to what it's really all about. Now I know. And now you know too. And the last book that I read in April, which I technically finished right at the beginning of May, but I read the bulk of in April, was Never Have I Ever by Jocelyn Jackson. This one is another one that just has content and trigger warnings that I didn't think were going to affect me as much as they did, but just the way that they talk about women's bodies in this book and eating disorders and just some other messed up topics just made me feel really uncomfortable. That's not why I gave this book 3 stars entirely, because I genuinely think if a book can get under my skin and make me feel uncomfortable, then it's doing its job, if that's what its job is to do. This wasn't necessarily the case with this book. I just thought it was okay. The beginning was so strong. We're at a ladies' book club and an outsider comes to the book club. She kind of takes over. She's this sultry young mom who the other women in the book club aren't sure if they're jealous of her, if they want to be her best friend, or if they're just angry that she's there. And then as the plot unfolds, you realize that she's not there to be friends with anybody. She's there on business. This book is about blackmail. I'm usually all in on a blackmail trope. I think that that can be really suspenseful. I think it can be thrilling, but in order for that to work, I think there has to be a ton at stake. And I really felt like there wasn't that much at stake here. I don't mean to be turning this into a rant review because I think 3 stars from me is still overall positive. The good and exciting parts in this book were really riveting. I think that this is another case of maybe the book being a little bit too long, the middle dragging just a little bit, especially because this Rue character lays all of her cards out on the table pretty early. There are twists throughout the book, but it wasn't one of my favorites. The beginning was great, the ending was great, the middle was a little slow for me. Well, that was everything I read in April. It wasn't a crazy great reading month, especially since I mostly listened to audiobooks this month and read some ebooks. I did get to some gems this month that I am very pleased with. I think that Big Little Lies is going on my all-time favorites list on Goodreads, and I am hoping that as this quarantine continues, I can start to get a little more read. As always, thank y'all so much for watching. I just love making these videos and I love being in this community, and I just hope everyone is doing the best that they can right now. I hope everyone's staying safe and taking some time to do things that you really do love and enjoy doing. So yeah, I'll see y'all in the next video. Bye.